Welcome to another episode of The Growth Compass, where we seek direction in the open sea of business growth. Today on the podcast, we have Mr. James Bates. Welcome.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, Blake.
Yes, and before we get into an introduction, just want to quickly shout out the sponsor, Senders. They are an agency that does email deliverability. This podcast would not be possible without them. More later in the episode about that. But now we can get into our conversation with James. So please, if you could, just give a quick introduction of yourself, where you're at now, how you got here.
Yeah, so my name is James Bates. I'm the founder and CEO of AdviNOW Medical. I personally have been in the high technology space for 30 years. Most recently, before AdviNOW, I had the opportunity to run a billion-dollar business in self-driving vehicle technologies. We sold that business, and as an officer of the company, it was a good time for me to retire, so I did. And I started to look what else I was going to do with my life. And I started looking at healthcare, really, because healthcare seemed like one of the biggest issues of our time. So with that, I thought originally I was just going to go and buy some medical practices. So I started looking at medical practices that were on the market for sale and started doing diligence on these medical practices. And to my astonishment, these are all pretty terrible businesses. Very low profitability for medical doctors' offices. It's a shame, but that is the case. With that in mind, I kind of thought I was going to walk away and figure out something else I was going to do with my life. And one of the guys that I became acquaintances with inside of the medical practice space came to me and said, "Look, James, I know my business is challenged. That's why I'm trying to sell it. Why don't you come help me fix it?" And so my first step was really to do a time and motion study in that practice. And what that means is I take a stopwatch and I measure exactly how long every action takes inside that medical practice. And so when you go to a doctor, exactly what does the front desk do? What does the medical assistant do? What does a nurse do? What does a doctor do? What does the radiation tech do? I mean, all of these people are involved, and their salary somehow gets charged back to each patient. Well, with that, what I quickly realized are really two main important things that led to the founding of AdviNOW Medical. The first was that 70% of the cost of the medical visit is the doctor. And you'd say, well, that kind of makes sense. The doctor's the main person in the medical visit, but that only leaves 30% outside of the doctor, which means if you can't reduce the doctor cost, ultimately you'll never have a good business. So then you start looking at the time the doctor spends. And 70% of the time the doctor spends on the patient are doing things that have nothing to do with their medical licensure. And so that is what really surprised me. And I thought, wow, these are things doctors don't want to do, but they end up doing. And now we have a situation where using artificial intelligence, we could eliminate all that waste that the doctors have in their day. And so that is what AdviNOW Medical was founded for. We use artificial intelligence and augmented reality to completely automate all aspects, all clinical and operational aspects of the medical practice. The AI engages with the patient, collects all the information that a doctor will want to collect. The AI then populates all that information in the electronic medical record and has a one-page summary that it presents to the physician so they can make that decision quickly. The doctor approves the decision. The AI scribes it into the electronic medical record as if a human did it themselves, saving the doctor 70% of their time on that patient. Now, here's the interesting thing. The doctor will still spend the same or even more time face-to-face with the patient, but they just spend way less time on the patient in the medical clinic.
The practice themselves.
Now they get to see twice as many patients per day without getting burned out because they're not doing things they shouldn't be doing. And ultimately, everybody wins. The patient, the doctor, and we literally cut 50% of the cost out of healthcare because of this action.
Wow. So what it seems like on your profile is that you've been involved with this business for about 9 years, 10 years now?
Yeah. It's probably 7 is more accurate from an active standpoint. Before that, we were going through the process. But yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's still a long time. A lot of interesting things that you've probably learned along the way. So before we dive more deeply into what you guys are doing now, I am curious. It says you are based in the Arizona area at the moment, and prior to that, you spent time in Japan in more technical roles. So how long were you in Japan?
So I lived overseas for 12 years, in Japan
Nice.
for 12 years. And most recently, I was in Japan with a startup company named Silicon Laboratories, where I ran the international operations for them, the Asian operations. And before that, Bell Labs sent me out there to be part of a development team that worked on the world's first digital cell phone chipset. And so those were great projects for me to be part of in Japan in business development, in general management, or in technical work. I really enjoyed living out there. And when I moved back, I moved to the Bay Area and was in the Bay Area for 6 years and then moved over to Arizona.
Okay, awesome. So two questions about Japan. So about the culture that you experienced while you were over there, how is it as far as the ecosystem goes with support for entrepreneurship, innovation, those types of things?
Well, Japanese culture in general is very conservative. So they usually want to go the route of I work for a big company, I make a big salary, and that kind of goes against a lot of characteristics that are required for founders for startup companies. You have to be able to take a risk and put it on your back and then run with it. The Japanese system in general is not set up easy to support that. So when I was there, I was the international arm of a US company. And so that made it very different than a pure startup in the Japanese world.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah,
But
yeah.
I still needed to hire local people, and finding the right local people that are Japanese but willing to take risks. It takes a little bit of work, but they do exist and they're anxious to go out and get ahead by reinventing the way things are done.
Yeah, interesting. Lots more that I have as far as that goes, just because that's very interesting. But something else that I saw on your profile is that you transitioned while you were over in Japan, is that you transitioned from a more technical role, which seemed to be your background at the time, to a marketing focused role. So at that point in your career, what was it like for you to make that transition professionally?
It was a little bit circumstantial, but it ended up being one of the best things I could have done for my career. Ultimately, out of graduate school, having the opportunity to join an organization like Bell Labs is a complete honor. I mean, they're one of the most storied research entities in the world. And so I was very proud of being a research designer working for Bell Laboratories. I went to Japan really almost as a technical liaison because I speak Japanese and English, to be able to work in Japan, work with the Japanese R&D team, and then work with some key Japanese customers. Well, halfway through my stint there, they decided that R&D in Japan was too expensive. And so they killed the R&D team.
No way.
And I was going to be sent back to the United States, where I came from, and that would have been fine, quite frankly. But that was the conversation. And then one of the leaders of the regional area over there, a guy by the name of Glenn Riley, he came to me and he says, look, James, you're an engineer, you can speak, you should go into business development. There's this marketing role here that we think would be a great fit for you. And by the way, I'll move you up a couple of levels in your benefits package to be here. And it became an offer I couldn't refuse. Timing is everything. And I very much loved my R&D role, but at the same time, having an opportunity to spend and do business development and be compensated pretty dramatically differently when I was there made it very much worth my while to make the
Yeah,
change.
and so again, just quickly with that, because I think it's such an interesting mix of skills. Like I have a lot of people in my personal network that are very technical. I lean more business development, sales, conversation, that direction. But the cross of having technical aptitude and also the ability to figure out messaging and speak to customers and things seem, I guess it depends who you ask, but they seem to be pretty divided. And so when you first picked up that marketing role, what was it like for you to step from technical into marketing? I guess given your role in the R&D team, was it something you were primed for, or was it something that was a big shift for you? And how did it impact the rest of your career?
Well, you spend your life selling, whether you whether you're selling yourself, whether you're selling your capabilities, whether you're selling a product. I mean, it really doesn't matter. And so as an engineer, went out and we're selling my capabilities, right? Because as an engineer, your capabilities, that's what makes you special.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd never actually done business development before, especially international business development or even product definition, which is kind of what my role was going to be, or negotiated with large companies and meeting with them. And I just never done any of that before. So, of course, I was a little nervous at it. But ultimately, when you go in there with a business card that said Bell Labs onto it, because of the reputation of the organization, you automatically get respect as somebody who deserves respect when you walk into the office. And that's true with almost any company at that time that you walk in. So I was very blessed, actually, to make that transition as a member of the Bell Labs Lucent organization, because it allowed me to be less of an expert initially as I made that transition. One of the good things about being an engineer is that everything is black and white, right? Either it works or it doesn't work. It's optimal or it's non-optimal. There's a mathematical calculation for everything that you do. There's always a right decision, or maybe let's say a better decision and a less better decision, right? Maybe they're not right and wrong, but there's one that's better.
Okay.
And just depends on what trade-offs you want to take. And it's all mathematically calculable. Well, in biz dev, that's not really the case. And you don't know what is the best way to negotiate a position, how you end up with the highest price, signing the contract, everyone in the room happy. And that is not really a natural skill. That's a learned skill. And the natural skill that you can utilize is the ability to read people, read their body language, and determine when things start to get uncomfortable. And so when I was first making the transition and I was learning to develop the ability to read people, especially in multiple different languages, at the same time, I was learning how to pitch things and present from PowerPoints and do all these things that as an engineer, you don't really do, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was able to make a lot of mistakes because of the company I was with, where I was forgiven because I'm really an engineer trying to be a marketing guy.
Yeah, okay.
After a few years of doing that, it really became secondhand where I excelled at being able to sell the pitch, sell the technology, sell the value, and be able to read that the person sitting on the other side of the table is buying into it and they get it. And that has been one of the most important skills of my career for sure.
Awesome. That's super cool. Thank you for indulging my questions about your experience in Japan. And then also quickly before we dive into your current venture at AdviNOW, when you went back into the Bay Area, were you involved in private equity investing there, or did you take management business development positions at one of those other companies?
Yeah, so I was in a general management position, vice president and general manager at a company named Maxim Integrated. And I decided to change jobs really at the time because Silicon Labs was going a different way than I wanted to go. I wanted to grow fast, aggressively, and the new CEO of Silicon Labs at the time wanted to grow in a more measured way, but very high profitability because he felt that that was the way the company would return the most to the shareholders. Well, I didn't really agree with that, so I wanted to leave, and I found an opportunity to join Maxim. At Maxim, I was running about a $120 million business when I joined. When I left, it was about a $320 million business. So it grew rather dramatically. It was a phenomenal time to be there. We created very high precision, low power, small devices that were used in anything from iPhones or Samsung mobiles to the iWatch or Fitbits, all of those type of Internet of Things type of products they were used in. And so, I've really been lucky in my career where I was involved in communication, mobile communication from its very early founding. I was involved in the whole Internet of Things from its very founding. I was found in the computer communications space from its very early on, and in the automotive space in the very early on. And I've really been blessed to be able to experience all of the technological revolutions that have happened over the past 25 years and been able to be right at the forefront of it.
With that company specifically, are there any interesting takeaways that you learned about what it means to scale a company or how to scale a company that came from that experience specifically?
Yeah, yeah. As founding an organization like I did in Silicon Labs, you essentially make all the rules, within ethical boundaries, right? You make all the rules. You decide who to hire. You decide what organization it needs to be. Because you're growing really, really fast, essentially you are the lone decision maker, almost for almost everything that you do. And so I had an immense amount of freedom, and my boss really trusted me to be able to make the right decisions. And I was empowered to do such. And we were very successful. We grew, to a very large team, very low cost of sales, high win rate. Everything went really well through that whole organization. Well, ultimately, when I went to Maxim was a 25-year-old company that always promoted from within. With the founder and CEO, his name was Jack, and he ended up being removed from the company for clerical reasons, stock backdating reasons back at the time. And the new CEO
Interesting.
brought in an outside executive to run an existing business for the first time in the company's history. And so I came on board and I started looking at everything that they were doing, and it just didn't make sense to me given what I just did in my previous life. And so I aggressively went and tried to change things, and let's just say it wasn't accepted well by all the existing executives there.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I ended up learning a tremendous amount about how to manage things politically in a larger company. I, found myself being shackled or being constrained in many, many ways that I felt were bad for the performance of the group and the company itself. And I had little patience for that. And that kind of bled through in some of the stuff that I did. And I have to say that through that experience, I've definitely learned I've learned a different level of maturity in dealing with things that I don't agree with. And it was very important in my growth as a human as well as a manager. So I'm very thankful for my time with Maxim. I really enjoyed it. I made some great friends there, and I'm always thankful for that experience. And then I was able to use that experience when I joined Freescale and moved out to Arizona, and that's where I was running that $1 billion business in self-driving vehicle company
Right.
technology. And that was another turnaround situation where I was coming into an organization that was losing money, and it was owned by private equity. And my job was to fix the bleeding, at the same time, create a strategy for growth. And so we really focused on two main areas. One was the self-driving vehicle technologies, or advanced driver assistance systems, ADAS. And then in electric vehicle technologies, charging, storage, drivers, things like this. And so in those strategies, we were able to become market leaders for our customers to drive that process.
Gotcha. And I had similar. I almost feel bad. I mean, we're at such like a high level. We're like accelerating through all of these experiences, and I just want to go. But with respect to AdviNOW, which I have a lot of questions for, but I had similar questions about the self-driving technology company. Sorry, what was the name again?
Freescale.
Freescale. Yeah. So I had similar
They're now
questions.
NXP. They merged with NXP, but yeah.
Okay, cool. Similar questions about that because that seems like such a difficult like industry space to be a part of when growing a business is already difficult when you're at uh, such massive like asset heavy, cost heavy investment with hard tech and things like this. And also you're at the cutting edge of technology. And so when was it around what year was it that you got involved with them?
2012.
So 2012. Is there anything more specific you could speak to about, and you can choose either vertical that you spoke to. Uh, Anything more specific about how you guys went about trying to define your customer, or maybe that's not even how it works in that space, or and then communicate with your customer, and then ultimately drive growth.
Yeah. So when I joined the company, my first task on the job was to go and make an evaluation of all of the product developments that we were in the middle of.
Interesting.
Through that process, I had two layers of management. So I was a senior vice president, and then there were vice presidents that reported to me, and then there's directors that report to them. And so I met with the vice presidents first to discuss what their strategy was for growth, what their clear differentiation was, and what the strategy was to maintain that over the long term. And the unfortunate reality is that the senior leadership at the time that I came in and started going through it was felt that their job was to get car manufacturers to send them an RFQ, and their market differentiation was how they responded to the RFQ. So if you have nothing to deliver as a company, and all you're doing is essentially doing contract orders for large companies like a GM or a Daimler or BMW or Toyota or somebody like that, and you're just creating application specific solutions just for them, you will never have a high level of profitability because you have abstained all of your expertise to somebody else, and you've become essentially a subcontractor for them. Well, we wanted to change that. And so what I ended up doing is replacing the top two layers of management, 50% with people from the outside, 50% with people from the inside. I promoted a couple of levels, people from the inside, and then brought people from the outside with instructions that we needed to be the experts. Right? We cannot, if we basically abdicate our expertise and become subservient to someone else's definition of what they think it is, then we will never have high profitability and we will always be struggling. However, if we can go in there and say, we're experts in braking, we're experts in radar, we're the experts. And by the way, GM, by the way, Toyota, this is what you need. I know you got your guys, they're telling you how to create, the self-driving vehicle, the next generation, what it's going to look like. But you know what? This is our solution for that. Isn't this cool? And through that process, you get to go and win business at not 30% gross margin, which is kind of what you get if you're a subcontractor, but more like 70% gross margin because you're now a technology provider and a partner. And those are completely different profitability levels. And so that was our goal going into it. And over the next 4 years, we were able to achieve that. And so the group grew from $700 million when I joined to over $1 billion. And we were dropping over $200 million to the bottom line when I left. And when I joined, it was less, we're losing $1 million. So it was dramatic changes that were able to be made.
That is super cool. And so after you had came in and very significantly changed how people were thinking about things, how the strategy was formed, and then brought in people, mixed up the team, solidified a team, what did the tangible execution on that strategy over the course of those 4 years look like? Was your approach with outbound, with inbound, whatever that mix was, pretty similar, or did it change pretty drastically over those 4 years?
Well, making the adjustment is hard because you need a different mindset, and automotive is a long-term strategy. It's not something that you can turn on a dime. So we had a lot of products that were in manufacturing that were very, very low profitability. And so a big portion of our job, my job, was to optimize the manufacturing process, lower the cost so we can make more money on the products that we're selling today. Because you can't go to a client and swap out what they're buying today. So let's say you go buy a Ford Ranger. Probably the electronics in that Ford Ranger were designed 10 years ago and started manufacturing 5 years ago, and they're going to be shipping for 10 years. Your automatic roll-up window or your anti-lock braking system or your stability control or whatever it is that's
Okay,
inside
yeah.
that car. They're shipping those for years. And
Interesting.
they were developed a very long time ago. So a big portion of our strategy was gross margin optimization, where we are improving our manufacturing technique. And that took a lot of my time. So that was about 50% of the focus. And the other 50%, as I mentioned previously, was coming up with a roadmap that got not really, they call them tier ones, but they're the people who make modules that's used in cars, not them excited. We want to get the actual brand excited. So we want Toyota, we want Nissan, we want GM. These are the guys who see the technology and the vision, and we want them to be excited about what we're making. And creating those and getting those design wins within that 4 years, that was the whole target. And we achieved that. It was fantastic.
Cool. And so this experience with this company eventually led to, if I understand the timeline correctly, you retired. And then after the short retirement, you said, I need to get into the medical space, natural transition from the automotive space. So thank you for indulging in all of that, because I think, like I said, there's just so much to learn from your experience and everything prior to what you're working on now. But I do want to give ample time to what you work on now. So you did give a great summary in the very beginning of the episode about AdviNOW. And I'm curious, my first question is a little different than what we've been talking about, and it is not so much about what you're doing specifically or how you're growing it and stuff, but at the current moment, what is your biggest issue? What is your biggest concern? What are you guys focusing on?
Yeah. So AdviNOW Medical is a very unique company as we automate all operational and clinical aspects of medical practices. And that creates a tremendous opportunity in terms of return on investment for the practice, because they make average 3% net profit to 36% net profit. Huge improvements in the profitability of the practice once they adopt our platform. But if every single thing that humans do in that practice is automated, which is what AdviNOW does, then either you allow your practice to be run the way AdviNOW wants it to be run, or you spend a lot of time configuring AdviNOW the way so it works the way you want it to work. And so our biggest challenge has been configuring our platform to be used in the way the doctors want it to be used, because they don't want to change the way they do the practice. They like the way they do the practice, and they
Yeah,
believe that they
sure.
have a special flavor just for them. So our software has to be able to be onboarded in an easy way. Well, historically, it's been manually onboarding doctors, and that's what we did. That is very, very difficult to scale. So right now, our biggest challenge and what we have in front of us is develop an artificial intelligence that will automate the onboarding by reading all of the medical records and customizing it per doctor, per practice, per condition, per treatment inside that medical practice. And so that's what we would do.
Are you guys servicing all types of medical practices, or
We are.
are you specific
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a
All
space?
types of medical practices.
Did you guys start out in a particular field?
We started
Or
out in urgent care and primary care. That was our first foray. But now, I mean, we're used in pediatrics and gynecologists and pain centers, I mean, across the board.
what is super innovative what you guys are doing, and it takes a lot of product development and learning from people actually putting it into practice. And so being in the medical space, I think it seems like a really interesting and almost potentially difficult challenge to present a solution to people that say, hey, this is very innovative, and I don't know if this is what you communicate, but in reality we are still figuring this out, and you are putting the quality of medical service that you provide to your clients in our hands. So what has it looked like to test and develop product and learn from failure in such a fragile space, from my perspective as medicine?
Well, ultimately, you have two clients, one that pays you and one that pays your client.
Okay.
So the one that pays us is the doctor's office. So if the doctor's not happy, if the front desk isn't happy, if it's not super intuitive and easy to use, they can fire you. But then if the patient isn't happy, the patient complains to the doctor's office, and then they will still fire you. So ultimately, the goal that we have is to be super intuitive for the doctor and super intuitive to the patient. No one should ever need to be trained on AdviNOW software. And that took a little bit of learning for us to realize that you needed to do that, right? You can go through and do training just like you're using your iPhone. You have a few fundamentals about using the iPhone, and you could probably figure out anything about that iPhone. It may take a little bit of time. Me training my mom is a lot more painful than me training my kids. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's a relatively intuitive platform. We needed that level of ease of use and intuitive interaction for our doctors and for the patients. And getting that right is a never ending battle, quite frankly.
So I think just because of my ignorance to the space, it seems again like that process of learning or that process of not having it as high quality is kind of super risky in a space like medicine. Is that a right way of looking at it, or is it in reality more similar to being risky and testing something that doesn't seem as crazy as medicine?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're always worried about getting things right, ultimately. So for our space, you could never be in the way of a doctor decision process. So we can never make a decision for a doctor. And if we did, we would be a diagnostic tool, which we're not, right? We help the doctor by collecting information and presenting it in intuitive ways, but we can't be the doctor. And so we have taken great care for that not to be the case. So if AdviNOW, something happens to AdviNOW, it just becomes an annoyance. It doesn't actually impact care.
Okay,
And
gotcha,
if it
gotcha.
actually impacted care, then that's something that you would be detrimental. And in your fail fast type of startup mentality doesn't work. But in the case where we're not we're not a diagnostic tool, we are essentially a patient and physician efficiency application. We have an opportunity to iterate and get things wrong before they become right.
Cool, 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 cool. That's awesome. As far as growth tactics, as far as scaling, so your guys' primary client is a medical practice. So do you guys do a lot of marketing type of inbound things? Do you do mostly cold outreach, outbound? What is your guys' approach?
We've right now we have greater demand than we can deal with. And
That's
so
good.
there are so many people that want to try out AdviNOW. We
Is it
don't
word of
have,
mouth that they're figuring out about it?
yeah, word of mouth or conversations I've had or things like that with other
Okay.
people. Yeah. And so our biggest challenge is not finding new practices to try us. Our biggest challenge is onboarding the ones that we have. And so what we have done is focused on a specific electronic medical record system called AdviNOW. We've partnered with them to give us access to all of the patient records, all of the claims data associated with each one of these potential clients. And that will allow our AI to onboard them in an automated way. So that is what our focus is, and that should allow us to get over $100 million of revenue over the next year just by focusing on the current clients in the funnel. Once that happens, then maybe we'll need to start doing outbound. But right
All
now,
right.
I'm just trying to convert the guys that we've got in the funnel.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, what a great problem to have. I think from what it sounds like, so when we initially talked about that AI onboard aspect of your business, it sounded like mostly from the perspective of a client, the value add to it. But now it kind of switched perspective and it said not only is it adding value to the medical practice of easing onboard, but also for you guys, your bandwidth
For
of
sure.
how many clients you can onboard at the same time increases as well.
Totally.
So, well, cool. Well, so that's a really cool problem to have. Usually, when I get into conversations about like growth tactics and things like that, I ask about any cutting edge technologies and things like that. But that is, I think, most of what I was wondering about what you guys have going on right now. And so I wish we could talk for another 45 minutes. Maybe you could be on a future episode. I'd really enjoy that. But before we let you go,
Sure.
there's two things. First thing, if somebody wants to find you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I can be reached, james.bates@advinow.com. Personally, if you'd like to reach out, I'd be happy to respond or refer you to somebody who would be most appropriate to respond. You could get the general info line at AdviNOW at info@advinow.com. You could go to our website, www.advinow.com, just kind of with the top word you see behind me there, AdviNOW Medical. And all of those will get you to somebody who'll respond and be able to help you out. If you currently use AthenaHealth as an EMR platform, we definitely would love to put you in our funnel and get you using AdviNOW in an automated instant onboarding way, which is the word we're using to talk about how we can onboard clients. If you are using a different TMR, we'll probably space you out in time a little bit to be able to work with you and hopefully that EMR vendor to get an instant onboarding capability with them as well.
Awesome. Sweet. And so this brings us to the final question of the podcast. I want to thank you so much for all of your time. Like I said, there are a lot of directions that we could go with the conversation. I hope we get an opportunity to do that in the future. But I always end it because I talk with some remarkable people like yourself on podcasts, and I'm always curious. It can be something small that happened recently. It can be something big that's more overarching. But I'm curious what inspires you.
What inspires me? What inspires me is the capability to make a difference. I mean, it's interesting when when you start out life and you're going through school, it's all about you, right? Can I get an A? Am I going to make the team? Am I going to be team captain? It's really all about you. And, in general, why teenage kids are selfish, right? I mean, that's all they know. But then after you grow past all that and then you're in a company, it's still all about you early in your career. If I do really well, then I can be promoted and I can get the big job. But then after you get the big job, you realize it's not all about you at all. It's all about everybody else. And you need your team to basically execute. And your capability is really not important anymore. It's can you get your team to perform? And then at a greater level, your team, what you're doing, is it making a difference in the world overall? AdviNOW has a capability to cut the cost of healthcare by 50% in the United States. Think about this. Over 50% of the dollars spent in healthcare today are spent by the federal government and state governments and Medicare and Medicaid. What this means is that every single healthcare company in the United States, if they were going to adopt AdviNOW, we could actually give free healthcare to every single person in the United States for the same price the government spends in healthcare today.
Wow.
That's how much waste is in our system. Absolutely, this is an opportunity where we can revolutionize the world. And that really gets me excited and keeps me driving forward, inspires me, if you will.
James, you got me fired up.
Let's go change the world, Blake.
That's right. This is super cool. Thank you so much for your time. That was a really awesome way to cap it off. I'm really excited for you to be back, and good luck with everything. Thank you, and thank you to everybody for hanging out until now. All right, have a
Appreciate
good
it.
day.
Thank you. All right, you too. Bye-bye.